Good morning, and welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. Today, I wanted to talk to you about hilling potatoes. So, today is March 26th, and this is my potato bed. This bed measures 15 by 25 feet, and I have 4 rows of potatoes growing. These potatoes were planted on February 13th, so they've been in the ground now about 45 days. Potatoes are ready to harvest anywhere from 80 to 120 days, so I'm just about halfway through with these potatoes. If you look at this point, the plants have all filled in nicely. This is what your potatoes will look like after about 45 days. These 2 rows over here, like I've talked about, that are a little taller, these are my 2 rows of red potatoes. They grow a lot faster. And these 2 rows over here are my Yukon Golds. So, hilling potatoes. This is a step that you do a couple times during the plant's life cycle. And what I do, first, if you look at these plants, see if I can get down here close and see. These stems grow up, out of the dirt, and much like tomatoes, potatoes also they're actually related to tomatoes. They're both nightshades. And I actually see some similarities in the leaves. If you look at these leaves, you can see how they're related. But basically, all up and down the stem of these potato plants, if you bring up dirt and hill the dirt up around those stems, the potato plant will continue to shoot out roots from any part of the plant that's under the ground. So when your plants get about this size, you want to do what's called hilling. You want to pull dirt and actually bury some of the plant under the ground. And you can see I've already done that on this row. A good general rule of thumb is to bury about 2/3 of the plant. So what I do is, if you look over here, I have my walking path. And you always want to leave space in your garden for paths, areas you can walk, so you're not compacting the soil where your plants are growing. So the first thing I do is I just use my good old pickaxe, and I come in here on the areas where I've walked and I dig up the soil, loosen it up, dig it up. Then all I do is I take my metal rake and I just pull the dirt up over the plants. And you can see, I've buried about 2/3 of the plant. So now all those stems that are now buried under that dirt will shoot out roots, and more potatoes will form in that upper soil. So it increases your yield, is one of the main reasons why you hill potatoes. Now the potatoes that form from these buried shoots towards the top of the plant, they'll be your smaller potatoes. The potatoes that are deeper down, that are actually forming right now, they're going to be the largest potatoes. So that's one main reason why you want to hill your potatoes and bring that soil up over the plant, is it's going to increase your yield. The other reason I like to hill the potatoes is it's a great opportunity to amend the soil and to fertilize. So after I dig up the soil and loosen it up, I come in and I add some all-purpose fertilizer. I side dress into this soil that I'm gonna bring up over the plants, some fertilizer, and I also add some compost into that soil. So in here, I've got my compost mixed in, and I've side dressed with some fertilizer. Then as I'm bringing that soil up over the plants, it's just a perfect opportunity to also fertilize your potatoes. A good rule of thumb as far as how often you should fertilize these is whenever you hill. If you remember, I hilled these potatoes a few weeks ago. We had a frost, so these plants were quite a bit smaller, and I hilled them at that point and applied fertilizer and compost. So then today I did the same thing, and that probably will be the last time I fertilize these potatoes. That should be plenty for the home stretch till these are ready to harvest. Another reason I like to hill potatoes is it's just great for weed control. You can see by digging up the soil, raking it up over these plants, it just really cuts back on your weeds. Keeps a nice clean garden. So that way there's no, your plants aren't competing with weeds. So basically this row over here, I have all done. I did that first thing this morning just to show you guys. You can see it's held up there nice and high. So I'm just going to continue working today on digging up the soil in between these rows and continuing to hill these potatoes. Now these Yukon Golds, you can see they're not quite as big as the other potatoes, but that's fine. I'm gonna hill them up and fertilize and get some compost into the soil. I've talked about my sandy soil here. There's a lot of people out there who might be watching who, if you have good rich soil to begin with, you might not need to add as much compost and fertilizer and amendments that I do. But because I grow in this sandy soil down here, I'm constantly having to add organic material, mainly compost, back into my garden. If you remember, this garden bed in the winter was where I grew my cabbages and collard greens. They're heavy feeders. So I started out this potato growing season, this soil was already probably in need of nutrients because those cabbages had taken everything out. So I'm constantly having to think about adding amendments back to my soil. But that being a little disadvantage of sandy soil, there are some advantages of this sandy soil. I do like how easy it is to dig. A job like today, this hilling of these potatoes, there's no rocks in my soil. It's just very easy to dig. It's very well drained. So there are some advantages to growing in sandy soil. Speaking of drainage, another reason why I like to hill these potatoes is, at this point, potatoes, they're not really susceptible to any disease or insect pressure. I never spray my potatoes, or I've never had any issues. At this point, they're good to go. But the one issue you can run into growing potatoes is if you have really rainy, wet weather. If your ground is sopping wet, the potatoes, if they're sitting in that wet ground for 5-6 days a week, your potatoes can rot. So that's why I don't overwater my potatoes. Usually they get plenty of water from our rain down here. So, but what this hilling does is, if I get some heavy rainstorms, these little channels in between the hills, they almost act as like little, the water drains down into those rows, and it kind of keeps them away from where the potatoes are growing under the ground. So it just kind of helps keep that garden drained and in the soil on the dry side, so those potatoes don't rot in the ground. Another thing I wanted to mention was when you plant potatoes. I planted mine on February 13th. Now my average last frost date here is March 1st. So a good rule of thumb is, if you're deciding when you should plant your potatoes, just determine your last frost date and go back 2 weeks before that, and you can put your potatoes in the ground. So a lot of people up north, you've still got plenty of time to think about growing potatoes. I highly encourage it. It's very rewarding. They're very easy to grow. It's just awesome to come out here early spring and see these nice, lush, green. I just think they're beautiful, these potato plants. It just amazes me how these things grow. And it just starts off the season with a little confidence. There can be a lot of challenges to growing tomatoes and summer squash. So I just love growing these potatoes because you just go into the season with some nice lush green plants. It looks amazing. And then obviously the harvest, the potatoes are just absolutely delicious. There's nothing more rewarding than growing your own food. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about my potato bed this year. So like I say, today I'm gonna continue cultivating these rows and hilling my potatoes. I started the video over here with a look at my onions. These things are just amazing me. I honestly thought I would be harvesting onions by now, but these things are still just growing. The bulbs are getting huge. You can see on like one like that, see how these onions are just really starting to bulb up. They sit right on the top of the ground like that. It's just pretty cool. This was my first year growing onions. Next year I'm definitely going to be growing a lot more. I will be doing some more Vidalia type varieties. So yeah, so that's what's going on today in the garden. And like I say, I just wanted to talk in a little more detail about hilling potatoes and why it's so important. I hope this video was helpful, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and we'll see you next time at Southern Tier Gardening.